Let's walk through an example of that. You mentioned to me earlier work that you've been doing with a rental services company. I'd love to share that story. What problem they came to you with, and then how you went about building them an agentic solution. So who came to you, and what was the problem?
Yeah, so it's a local rental business. They rent heavy equipment, skid steers, excavators, floor sanders, to a mix of construction companies that are doing things as well as the general public. So as you might imagine, they get tons of inquiries, right? Inquiries around availability, inquiries around pricing, what they do and don't rent. So a lot of those calls are coming in and distracting from the rest of the business, right? Running the operations, dispatching equipment, dealing with problems, fixing and maintaining equipment. And they run a relatively small staff. So the owner of the business has to field a lot of those calls. And his challenge was twofold. One, he struggled to give the same level of customer service and the ability to try to solve customers' problems and get them the information in a very customer centric way by just taking someone off of their post and having them answer the phones. So he always saw a degrading quality if he wasn't the one doing the job. And he then had all of the other things he needs to do in the business suffer because he's always taking all the phone calls, right? So his goal was quite clearly just to reduce the number of things he had to answer every day. If it was a price quote or if it was just an answer, do you have this, if it's available? That was his main goal. Therefore, he could free up his time to deal more intimately with customers who had problems, to help his staff from managing the fleet of equipment and the rest of the business. So that was the problem we set out to solve. What we built was based off of our framework. We trained an agent to know all of his pricing and all of his pricing policies, right? So he's got some unique ways he prices and, very customer friendly way to extend a rental and things like that, as well as delivery policies, how far, how much, etc. So we had to train our agent on all of those, different elements of his business. And then it would take phone calls for him, right? So that's what it was deployed to do. It's mainly going to give pricing and take bookings. But he sees the opportunity to expand that to potentially, dispatching for dropping off equipment, picking up equipment in the future, and additional benefits.
Yeah. How do you train an agent like that? So what sorts of information does it have to ingest to be able to simulate, to replicate the experience of talking to the owner of a business who presumably has been doing this for a long time and is an expert really in his business? How do you train that agent? What sort of things do you feed it to give it confidence and information to respond to questions?
So probably one of the biggest challenges was exactly that, right? So we could get it 70% of the way there just from data that he had, right? He had data on his website. He had, his pricing policy was clear. He had the price per, piece of equipment per duration of rental. So we could get a lot of that to ingest it into answering questions just based off of that data. And it would give that coupled with the knowledge that's in a large language model, right? And of course, we had to give it guardrails so it wasn't making things up or finding something on the internet and just answering the question with something that wasn't true and hallucinating. So we had to narrow it down based off of the data that we had about his business, as well as just what the LLM can infer from knowledge. But that only got it maybe 70% of the way there. The other 30% was the real difficult piece, and that'll be iterative. But that was extracting all of the 20 plus years of knowledge, right? And things he would just intrinsically know and say on a call, because he is who he is and what he's done for so long. And the agent would have no way of knowing that because it's not written down and it's just his way of working. So that was the biggest challenge because, he's a busy guy and having him call and test during testing and training to give us feedback is something he had to free up his time to do. And then the way to get that information out, it's not like it was a document he just didn't give us, right? It was knowledge and it was in his head. So we actually came up with a creative solution for that, whereas during training, he could call and have a conversation like he was a customer. But if the agent ever went and did something he didn't want it to, and it answered a question the way he didn't want it to, we actually built in kind of like a keyword he could say, which would take the agent out of I'm a rental agent solving your problems into I'm just listening now to how you want me to behave. And that would give that would give him the ability to dictate to it what exactly he would say, right? So no, this is how I would handle the solution or the situation in that scenario. And then we would get that notes, and our development team could incorporate that back into the behavior. Maybe that was changing the prompt, right? Maybe it was, we were getting pricing wrong, or it had read into something from the data, and that happened a few times. Like he doesn't rent painting equipment, doesn't rent paint sprayers or any of those things, but one of the descriptions of a different piece of equipment, I think it was a pressure washer, had something that confused the agent, right? So he started asking questions and kind of broke in and said, wait a minute, I don't rent this stuff, how are you getting that? So we had to figure out from what the model was responding with from our RAG database as to what it was getting and why it thought that it rented something it didn't. And that allowed us to kind of correct the behavior and get back on track. So that was a bit of an innovative thing that we built into the process for him in order to make it easy for him to help us train.
How does this integrate into his existing business and the stack?
Yeah, so a little bit of challenges around that just because the software that he was on from call it a back-end product doesn't expose a lot. So we originally just gave him a very clean way to then take the rental information that the customer wanted and input it. That was the first kind of phase. The second phase is to integrate with QuickBooks for him because that's what he uses in the background, and they've got a more robust API. So we're going to leverage that for a lot of the things that we can then pull from an inventory perspective and data and customer information. So that's where we're pulling customer information and updating customer information. We're leveraging QuickBooks from that perspective because his other tool didn't have it, and he already has a synchronization between those two.
Yeah. Was there any skepticism on his part about the potential for AI and agents to kind of replicate him before you began? And like, how does he feel about it now?
Yeah, there's definitely some skepticism because he's again he's a very vibrant individual, right? He's always he's outgoing, he's very engaging, right? So he wanted to really have a digital twin of himself. And we didn't set out to digitize his personality, right? What we wanted to do was create something that could offload the work and do it in a very professional way and not sound, like a robot to its end customers. So the voice that we chose, right, from an engagement perspective was part of that. The speed with which it talks and some of the ways it is engaged is in some of that. So he was a bit skeptical at first, partly because, he is who he is from a personality perspective, but also we had to temper that a little bit and say, like, we're not trying to recreate you from a personality perspective. We're trying to recreate what you're doing in your business. So we set expectations a little bit from that perspective. And then once we got the first kind of MVP up and he could have a bit of a conversation, just ask questions about equipment, he was actually pleasantly surprised because it's just knowledgeable about what he has and what it could be used for and whatnot. And then we had to iterate and fine tune on the various permutations and combinations of equipment, right? To make it feel more like he would naturally engage. But once we got it to that level, I think, it got him to a point where he was confident it could at least engage and take a good portion of calls and answer a lot of questions that people had. Of course, we still need to give the customers a way that they can escalate. He can talk to them individually and answer questions if the agent can't get it. And we anticipate that also improving over time, right? Give it a year worth of training and back and forth, and it'll be better than it is on launch.
Yeah. And my understanding, this is recently deployed, so not all the numbers are in, but previously he was spending all his time doing customer service related calls. What does the kind of after state look like in terms of what his week is like now?
Yeah, you're right. We're early days. It's kind of a phased rollout, so it's not being asked to take 100% of his workload in the beginning here. So before any deployment, he was on the phone all the time. Probably 70% of his day was on the phone, either answering questions or taking new bookings or dealing with an issue of a rental. So the out of the gate numbers we're anticipating tracking that towards 50% of his calls, which mainly is going to be the bookings and pricing inquiries and do you rent this equipment or that equipment. We fully anticipate that he's still going to handle customer issues where they've had a problem. The machine can't start. they had an accident, right? Those types of scenarios, we fully anticipate him still engaging, and that's where he's going to spend his time on the phone. But those low-hanging fruit from a customer inquiry or booking, we anticipate taking those calls. So probably about half of his total calls.
And 70% of his time was on calls. So you're talking about potentially freeing up 35% of his time.
Yep.
And tell me a little bit about the role of the managed service part of the business here. What are you doing with him on an ongoing basis to ensure this works and scales and delivers that value?
Yeah. So as part of the ongoing service, so first of all, we give him visibility into what's going on. So we have a portal that has access into view all of the calls. It analyzes sentiment of the call. So he can flag up if there was a call that was a negative sentiment. He can follow up with the customer if need be, or he can listen to the call or read the transcript and then give us feedback and say, hey, this is behavior we need to correct. So the service is really to provide him the visibility into what's going on and then work with him to correct anything where the behavior isn't what he wants. So then he gets the product that he wants long term, right? In addition to that kind of visibility and ability to see what the agent's doing, that human oversight, we also have some effort for him to tune it. So for example, dispatching is something he thinks it might do in the future. Well, if that dispatch is as simple as saying, hey, this order is in and we can read his back end financial system and it's due out tomorrow, right? At the end of the day, the agent could go through all of the things that are due to be delivered tomorrow, and it could go and make a phone call or a text message to the drivers to go and say, hey, here's your schedule for the day. So building those additional functionalities in over time is another element of the managed service too. So it's going to continue to grow and add value to his business.